Welcome to the Daily Plunge. We are in the book of Exodus, chapter 14, verses 5 through 31. Now, Pharaoh and his political officials have they have an awakening moment. They're like, oh my gosh, what have we done? Why have we released our slaves? Who's going to do this work for us? Who's going to build us all our monuments? And so Pharaoh musters his army to go chase after the slaves. And you have to understand that this chariot army is the height of military technology at this time. This is a swift, fast-paced army with this deadly chariot platform to cut down their enemies. And the Israelites have nothing to defend against it. But still, Israel is boldly marching with confidence away from Egypt. Of course, they're not aware, right? And Pharaoh is determined to drag them back into slavery. And isn't that always the way of the devil, that he's not going to give up without a fight when we move away from our bondage to sin? And you know, the devil is always trying to tempt us to give up and go back, whether it's moving away from a bad habit, moving away from an addiction, from our sin. He's trying to drag us back. And so the Israelites then, in verse 10, it says they looked up and they saw Pharaoh's army coming down on them. And instead of seeing the pillar of cloud and fire that's right there, they see the army and they panic, right? They're terrified. They cry out to the Lord. And you know this is a desperate cry, because then they pick on Moses. What? You couldn't leave us alone in Egypt? We were so happy being slaves. There weren't enough graves in Egypt that we could have died there, right? And it's just this pathetic thing where they'd rather go back to being slaves than to die as free people. And Moses says, don't be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the Lord deliver you. The Lord's going to fight for you, but don't be afraid. And the thing is that Israel's not in a position to fight for themselves. Only God can deliver them. And that's the truth of us always, right? We are not able to save ourselves. God must save us. Now, one of the things that's interesting is God has baited Pharaoh into chasing Israel. And as he's pouring down on them, he tells Moses, stretch out your arm and I will open up the sea and they'll cross over on dry land. And so they go, and the Lord puts the angel of the Lord between the Pharaoh's army and his people. And the Lord is fighting for his people. He throws the army into confusion. He's jamming up their wheels. And it says that the Lord looked down from the pillar of cloud and fire. The Lord himself is right there with them. God, it's not just a theophany. God is present with them. And what's interesting is that Pharaoh assumes that the opening of the sea that God has done as a measure of his grace for his people will also extend to Pharaoh. And in this sinful and broken world often misinterprets God's grace for themselves when they hate God and they hate his people. God does this to bless his people, but that does not extend to Pharaoh and his army. In fact, once they are down in the sea, he tells Moses once again to stretch out his arm, and the sea covers back over, right, the Egyptian army, and not one of them survived. And it says, and here's the culmination, the whole point of this was to gain glory for the Lord through Pharaoh. God displays his power, and when they saw the Lord's power, they feared. They put their trust in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Well, thanks, friends. Have a blessed day.